Hey everybody, and welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be, taking a deep dive into software requirements elicitation.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, it is. We're going to be using some excerpts from a university level software requirements engineering course. And, well, we're going to be learning how to gather all the info we need and define what's needed so we can build software that meets the needs of the user.
Right. And that's really important because I think if you think back to all of the software that you've used in your life,
Oh, I know.
some of it's great and some of it not so much.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to requirements.
It really does. It
Yeah.
really does. So I'm excited to kind of dive into this. And the course materials that we have actually start by saying that elicitation is not simply gathering requirements.
Oh, that's interesting.
So what's going on there?
Yeah, it's a really good point that the course makes because when we say gathering, it makes it sound passive, like we're just picking up requirements that are already out there.
Right.
But elicitation is much more active. It's about digging deep and uncovering what users truly need,
Okay.
even if they can't articulate it themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's about collecting, discovering, extracting, and defining those needs, not just writing down the first thing that somebody says.
Oh, I see. So you're really trying to almost figure out what people would ask for if they knew what was possible.
Yeah, you've got it. And here's something I find fascinating, too, about this whole thing. Requirements development, it isn't a straight line.
Oh, okay.
So you might start with elicitation, and then you go and you analyze what you've learned, and you think you're ready to write the requirements, and then you realize, wait a minute, we've missed something.
Yeah.
And then you go back to elicitation, you do more refinement. It's a continuous cycle of discovery.
Got it. So it's iterative.
It is.
Okay, so the course keeps mentioning these stakeholders.
Right.
Can you break down for me who they are?
Yeah, so stakeholders are anyone who has an interest in the software, anyone who's affected by it or can affect it.
Yeah.
So obviously we have the project managers, the developers, the testers.
Right.
But it goes way beyond that. You have customers and users, sometimes even society or regulatory bodies can be stakeholders.
Wow, I hadn't thought about it that broadly.
Yeah.
So how do we actually go about getting information from these stakeholders?
Well, there's a bunch of different techniques, each with their pros and cons. One classic method is interviews. But we're not talking about a casual chat here.
Right.
It's about building rapport, preparing questions, and most importantly, actively listening to the answers.
I actually noticed in the course they had this tip about asking why multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
And they said that that can really get to the core of the problem, kind of like peeling back the layers of an onion.
That's a powerful technique. Now, imagine you bring a bunch of stakeholders together in a structured setting. That's where workshops come in.
Oh,
They're great for brainstorming and problem solving.
Yeah.
But here's a little story from my own experience. I was once involved in a workshop that was supposed to be about gathering website requirements for an online clothing retailer.
okay.
And it was a total disaster.
Oh, no.
Nobody could agree on anything. We ran way over time, and we walked away with no clear requirements, just a bunch of vague ideas.
So what went wrong?
I think a few things. First, we didn't have a clear agenda or facilitator, so the conversation just kind of meandered all over the place. Second, we invited too many stakeholders, and they all had conflicting priorities, and that just led to gridlock. And finally, we didn't do a good job of documenting the discussion, so all those great ideas just vanished into thin air.
That's a good reminder that even with good techniques, execution is key.
It is absolutely key. Now, workshops are about collaboration, but sometimes you need to focus more on understanding users' attitudes and preferences. That's where focus groups shine.
Okay.
They're kind of like mini workshops designed to gather qualitative data, like what users like or dislike, what are their hopes and fears regarding the software.
So focus groups are about feelings, opinions, while workshops are more about brainstorming, problem solving.
You got it. But sometimes the most revealing insights come from simply watching users in their natural habitat.
Mm-hmm.
That's the power of observation.
Right.
It's like being a fly on the wall, seeing how they interact with existing systems or perform their tasks. You might uncover things that they don't even realize they're doing.
Oh, that makes sense. So, like, they might be using a workaround for a clunky process, and by observing them, you're like, oh, that's a need that they didn't even know they had.
Exactly. Now imagine you're trying to gather information from a huge group of users, spread across the globe.
Right.
That's when questionnaires become really valuable.
Very good.
They're efficient for gathering data at scale. The trick is crafting questions that are clear, concise, and give you those valuable insights you need.
Right. So you don't want to end up with just a mountain of data that you don't know what to do with.
Yeah, and analyzing the results is just as important as creating the questionnaire itself.
So how do we get a handle on how the software fits into the bigger picture, like how it interacts with other systems?
Yeah, that's where system and user interface analysis come in.
Okay.
It helps you figure out what requirements are needed to make sure your software can talk to other systems, and exchange data smoothly. It helps you map out the software's ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah. And speaking of visualization, user interface analysis, we can use that to look at existing systems or similar products.
Right.
And we can get clues about what works well and what doesn't from a user's perspective.
Right.
Even simple things like screenshots can be super valuable for understanding how users actually interact with the software.
Yeah. What about documentation that already exists? Can that be helpful?
Oh, absolutely. You can unearth hidden gems in documents like, requirement specs from past projects or business process documents, user manuals, things like that. They can reveal implicit needs and assumptions that stakeholders might not even think to mention. It's like archaeology for software development.
I love that. Okay, so we have all these techniques. Once we've chosen our approach, what are the steps involved in carrying out those elicitation activities?
Well, the course breaks it down into 3 stages: preparation, execution, and follow-up. And each stage has its own best practices.
Okay.
Let's start with preparation.
All right. So what are some key things to keep in mind when prepping for elicitation?
Preparation is really important. It's like laying the foundation for a house. If you get it wrong, the whole thing can crumble.
Right.
So you really need to clearly define what your elicitation session is trying to achieve. You need to create an agenda that outlines what you're going to discuss, how much time you have, and sharing that agenda with the stakeholders beforehand. It helps keep everybody on the same page.
So it's about setting clear expectations and ensuring a productive session.
Exactly. And think about the logistics.
Oh, right.
Do you have the rooms, the projectors? If you're working with stakeholders remotely, do you have the video conferencing tools? Just as importantly, you need to learn about your stakeholders. What are their backgrounds, their preferences? Are there any cultural considerations that you need to keep in mind?
Right.
This will help you tailor your approach and make sure that everyone feels comfortable sharing their thoughts.
Okay. So how about the actual questions you're going to ask?
The art of crafting the right questions. This is where your inner detective comes out to play.
Right.
Start by thinking about any gaps in your understanding of the project. If you've already sketched out a preliminary use case model, use that to brainstorm questions. And remember that tip from the course. Always be ready to ask why multiple times.
Yeah.
You got to get to the root of the problem.
It's amazing what a little persistent questioning can uncover.
It really is.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to explore those edge cases, those what-if scenarios,
Yeah.
What could go wrong? What happens when things don't go according to plan? Understanding these edge cases can help you build more robust software that can handle anything.
So it's kind of like thinking of all the ways a user might try to break the software.
Exactly. So you can design it to be resilient.
All right, so we got our questions, we've gathered our stakeholders. Now what? What are some best practices for running those elicitation activities?
Okay, well, first and foremost, transparency is key. Briefly explain to your stakeholders, what elicitation techniques you're going to be using.
Okay.
Whether it's interviews, workshops, or observation, it's just helpful to set the stage and make sure that everyone's comfortable participating.
So it's making the process clear and making sure that everyone feels like they're a part of the team.
Right. Now, here's a tip that might sound obvious, but often gets overlooked. Take good notes.
Oh, yeah?
Ideally, have a dedicated scribe who can capture the key points. Decisions, action items, any outstanding issues that pop up. Accurate documentation is gold, especially when you're dealing with so many stakeholders and so much information.
I love that idea of a scribe. And the course actually mentioned some really cool note-taking tools like those audio pens that transcribe handwritten notes.
Oh, wow.
And can even link them to the audio recording.
Technology can be really helpful in this process. And don't forget about visual aids.
Yeah?
Things like whiteboards, flip charts, even photographs. They can be useful for capturing information in a way that makes sense to everyone. The key is choosing tools that fit the context and make things run smoothly.
So we've prepped, we've executed our elicitation activities, and now we're on to the final stage follow-up. What are some key steps here?
Okay, well, first, get those notes organized and share them. Consolidate all the information you've gathered. review it carefully to make sure it reflects what was discussed, and then send it out to the stakeholders for their feedback.
Okay.
It helps you validate your understanding and catch any misunderstandings early on.
Right, so it's kind of like a feedback loop
Yeah.
that ensures that everyone is on the same page.
Exactly. And absolutely keep track of any open issues or questions that came up during those elicitation sessions.
Yeah.
Things that need further investigation, clarification, a decision. A good issue tracking tool can help you keep everything organized and make sure that those loose ends don't slip through the cracks.
Okay, so we've gathered all this valuable stakeholder input, we've documented it very carefully, and now what? How do we start making sense of it all?
That's where the next step comes in. Classifying stakeholder input. It's about sorting those nuggets of information into meaningful buckets so we can start turning them into clear, actionable requirements.
Okay, I'm ready to categorize.
That's what we'll be digging into next.
Stay tuned, everyone. We'll be back soon to explore how to turn those raw insights into the building blocks of great software.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Last time, we were talking about all those different types of stakeholder input.
Right, all those business needs and user goals and technical constraints.
So many different pieces of the puzzle. So let's say we've, carefully sorted all that input into those categories.
What happens next? How do we actually turn all that raw material into clear, concise requirements? The kind that developers can use to build the software.
That's where we move on to requirement specification. So we take all that input and transform it into a structured document,
Okay.
a blueprint for the development team.
Yeah, so it's like translating from the language of, human needs into the language of software development.
You got it. And just like any translation, clarity is key. Each requirement has to be stated in a way that's unambiguous, concise, and easy to understand.
Right. No room for misinterpretation.
Exactly. And just as important as clarity is testability. We need to be able to verify that the software actually meets each requirement.
Right. And objectively measure that.
Yes, this is really important for quality and making sure we're building the right thing.
Absolutely. So could you give an example of, how you might turn a vague requirement into something testable?
Sure. So instead of saying something vague like, the software should be user-friendly,
Right.
which is really subjective. Yeah.
We could say something like, users should be able to complete a purchase in 3 steps or less.
Okay.
Now that's a requirement we can test.
Right. That's measurable, yeah. What else is important to consider when you're crafting these requirements?
Well, each requirement has to be complete. So it should contain all the information that developers need to implement it. No missing pieces, no assumptions.
So you're kind of like anticipating the developer's questions,
Yeah.
giving them the detail they need.
Exactly. Consistency is key as well. The requirements shouldn't contradict each other.
Right. They should all work together.
They have to work together. And then traceability, every requirement should be linked back to its source.
Oh.
So we should be able to see which stakeholder input or business need led to that requirement.
So it's like a trail you can follow.
An audit trail.
Yeah, right. Now, I imagine there are different ways to actually document these requirements. Are there any standard formats? There are various formats and templates out there, but the core principles we've discussed, those are universal. The goal is to create a clear, concise, testable, complete, consistent, and traceable blueprint.
I'm so fascinated by all this. It's amazing how all these initial stakeholder inputs, get transformed into this structured document
Yeah.
that guides the entire software development journey. It's like building a bridge between the world of ideas and the real world.
That's a great way to put it. I think the deeper we go into requirements elicitation, I keep thinking about how important empathy is.
Empathy
Yeah.
in software development.
Yeah. It's all about stepping into the user's shoes, really understanding their needs, their goals, their frustrations, even their hopes and dreams.
So seeing the software through their eyes.
Exactly. That empathy, that deep understanding of the user is what leads to software that people love to use.
Yeah, software that solves real problems. I'm starting to see how that's so powerful. It's not just about building software, it's about building software that has a positive impact.
It is. It makes me think of that quote. I think it comes from the design world.
Okay.
It says, people ignore design that ignores people.
Wow, that's so true. And I think it applies to software development too. If we ignore the needs of our users, we risk building software that's ignored or even worse, disliked.
Yeah, That's why elicitation is so important, because it bridges the gap between those developers and the users, ensuring that we build what people want.
This has been so helpful. I feel like I'm really starting to appreciate both the art and science of this whole process. So now I think it would be helpful to explore some of the common pitfalls that can trip us up during this process.
You're right. Understanding those potential stumbling blocks can help us be successful.
Okay, so what are some of those common traps we should watch out for?
Well, one of the most common mistakes is failing to involve the right stakeholders. It's tempting to just focus on the users who are most vocal, the ones who are easiest to reach. But you really need to get a diverse range of perspectives.
Yeah, you got to make sure you're hearing from everyone.
And along those lines, another pitfall is assuming we already know what users want.
Right.
It's easy to make assumptions based on our own experiences or biases, but...
Yeah, you got to come into this with an open mind.
Exactly. And speaking of listening, another common mistake is not listening actively during elicitation sessions.
Right.
It's not enough to just hear the words. We need to understand the meaning behind the words.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to how things are said, the tone of voice.
Yeah, body language. Active listening is a skill. It takes practice. And then, of course, there's the classic pitfall of focusing on solutions rather than problems.
Yes. It's so easy to jump right into solution mode.
I know, it is. But remember, elicitation is about understanding the why behind the what.
Right.
It's about understanding those root causes so you can design the right solutions.
So you got to dig deeper.
Mm-hmm. Another trap is failing to document the process.
Oh, right, yeah.
It's tempting to rely on memory, but good documentation is crucial.
Yeah, you got to keep that historical record.
And finally, a pitfall that can really undermine the whole thing is poor communication.
Ah, right.
This means not keeping stakeholders informed, not providing feedback, not addressing concerns.
Communication's so important. It's like the glue that holds the whole project together.
It really is.
This has been so helpful.
Good.
All these pitfalls, it's good to be aware of them. Now, I'm really curious to hear what our listeners have come up with in response to that thought-provoking question.
Yeah, about uncovering those hidden needs in e-commerce.
So, listeners, as you recall, the challenge was this. If you were working on a new e-commerce website, what one surprising question would you ask a customer? To uncover a hidden need that they might not even know they have.
I like to think about it as sparking those aha moments.
Right, right. And it's like we're all gathered around a virtual campfire sharing stories and insights.
Yeah, and maybe even spark a revolution.
I love that.
Yeah.
So as you settle in around that campfire, what surprising questions pop into your mind? What would unlock those hidden gems and lead to exceptional e-commerce experiences? We'll explore all of that when we come back for the final part of our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. Remember that virtual campfire? Well, we're ready to hear what surprising questions you'd ask to uncover those hidden e-commerce needs.
Ooh, yes. I love this part. It's like those aha moments. That's what makes elicitation so fun.
Right. As we were prepping for this episode, we came up with a few of our own.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, just to kind of get the ball rolling.
I like it.
So imagine you're talking to someone, they love to shop online.
Mm-hmm.
What's that one question that makes them stop and think? Maybe reveal something they didn't even realize they wanted.
Yeah, you want to get them thinking outside the box?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, here's one we came up with. If you could magically change one thing about your online shopping experience, I mean anything, it doesn't matter if it's possible or not, what would it be?
Oh, I love that. So it encourages them to dream big.
Right.
And you never know what they might say.
Exactly. Like they might say, well, I wish I could see how clothes would look on E instantly without having to order them and try them on.
Right. Or I wish I had a personal stylist who could give me advice, based on my budget.
Yeah. And even if those ideas aren't possible right now, they tell us something important.
Absolutely.
Okay, here's another one. What's the one thing that really frustrates you when you're shopping for, let's say, furniture online?
Ooh, those pain points, those are gold.
Right. So if someone's shopping for furniture, they might say, it's so hard to tell the size, for the photos. I wish I could see it in my room.
Yeah.
And that frustration could lead to something like augmented reality.
Yeah.
To place furniture in your home virtually.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, here's a different one. What one piece of advice would you give to the team designing this website?
Oh, I like that. So you're giving them a voice at the table.
And they might have some really insightful feedback, that we wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah, it shows that you value their input.
Okay, now for something fun. What's the one thing about this website that would make you tell all your friends about it?
Oh, that's a good one. Word of mouth is so powerful.
Exactly. So they might say something like, oh, I tell everyone if they had an amazing rewards program.
Right. Or if they had a way to recommend gifts, like gifts that my friends would actually like based on their interests.
Yeah. So we're not just meeting their needs, we're delighting them.
You got it.
This has been such a great conversation.
It has.
So many creative ideas. It really shows that elicitation is both an art and a science.
It is.
It's about asking those questions, listening carefully, and being open to those unexpected answers.
Absolutely. The goal is to really understand those users and build something that makes their lives better.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into software requirements elicitation.
It has flown by.
I know. We've explored all the techniques, the pitfalls, and even how to uncover those hidden needs.
We have.
So before we sign off, I want to leave everyone with this. The next time you're using some software, just take a moment to think about all the work that went into it. All the stakeholders, the developers, the testers.
And the users.
Yes, because at the end of the day, software is about people.
It is.
Connecting, communicating, and creating experiences that, really enrich our lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deep.
Until next time.